Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. Former House Speaker Paul Ryan, he swapped the Hill for C-suite consulting, and he says there's optimism heading into the inauguration.
These CEOs see, an A-team being put in place on the economy, and they're ready to go.
But the key for the GOP is delivering on all that promise.
It's all about not having Republican factionalism erupt. Because if you break into factions, you can't get your agenda passed, especially with these narrow margins.
And where Los Angeles' leadership lands as the city plans a rebuild after wildfires, crisis management expert Eric Desenhall.
The only thing that matters in this news cycle is blame. Nobody wants to talk about solutions. It's all about blame.
All that today, plus the SEC has sued Elon Musk, Microsoft is cutting back, and Zuckerberg who? The evolution of the world's third richest man.
He's not the same Mark Zuckerberg.
Well, I think it actually started with the mixed martial arts training.
It's Wednesday, January 15th, 2025. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
The SEC filed a lawsuit against Elon Musk yesterday, accusing the billionaire of committing securities fraud back in 2022 by failing to disclose he had amassed an active stake in Twitter. The SEC says Musk was 10 days late in reporting that he had built a position greater than 5%, and that the delay in reporting allowed him to underpay by at least $150 million for shares he later purchased. He got such a deal on those Twitter shares. An attorney, he's only lost how much money? An attorney for Musk called the case a sham and a ticky-tack complaint, not a ticky-tock complaint, ticky-tack, and said the SEC's action was an admission that they cannot bring an actual case. An SEC spokesperson said that the litigation release is, in their words, literally an actual case brought by the SEC. They declined to comment further. In a post on X, Musk called the SEC a totally broken organization. It's unclear how the SEC will proceed with the case under the Trump administration. I have a pretty good idea, but it's unclear at this point.
You wonder if this was a parting shot.
Exactly. There's a lot of parting shots that we're seeing. How many more days? What's it? 5 more days, 6 more days.
Well, to me, though, I imagine, and we got to look into the details of just how it all happened. If there's a rule that says you need to disclose by next day, and you don't,
an accounting rule,
and you don't do it, then you pay. And I'd say it's like a fine. And in this case, it would be a fee.
Right.
But that's.
And I remember at the time.
Rule.
Yeah, I remember at the time it was a big deal because I think it was not only that he didn't disclose. I think it was he was saying he was not looking to be an active manager, manager, or to try and change and sway the company, that he was going to be a passive investor. And I think that was marked incorrectly at the time, too. Now, maybe he was changing his mind over that period of time, but that was trying to go back.
And I think that one of the reasons they were trying to get the depositions and the testimony was the idea of trying to understand what actually was going on, not just in people's minds, but the phone conversations, the emails, about what, in fact, was really happening in this particular moment. And as for being a bad deal, I would actually argue to you it is probably, even economically, the best deal he's ever made.
Oh, yeah. But it just in terms of how much market cap Twitter has lost since the...
But what I was going to say is it's the best deal he's ever made.
Because he
for the AI stuff for Grok, too.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Right.
So all of a sudden he has bought this funnel of data that's going to have a huge... I've always said this. I was not always in the category of, he's going to lose his shirt.
Right.
I was in the category of, he's going to turn this thing and actually make money out of this
someday.
thing. And
but
you say someday, I think actually we're probably on that day.
But the grousing was about
already.
how much the banks lost and, the loans that were made, and it was a bad deal. I mean, there were certain parts of media that just loved the valuation of Twitter and how much money he had. What did he pay for it, and what's it worth now?
Well, a lot of it wasn't his money, too. He had so many.
That's what I mean. And that the banks got killed and everything else. So maybe there was always a method to the madness, but I don't think he got a good deal when he bought it. I don't think he was able to buy it on the cheap. I think he way overpaid for it.
He wanted out of it.
Yeah, right. Maybe you can turn
No.
Maybe
At the time, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying, but in the totality of life, when we look back on this, it will turn out to be that both the actual Twitter, because of what he's been able to do with Grok, and what it ultimately has done to his influence, and therefore the valuations
and for
of
the
SpaceX,
rest of us as the
Tesla,
savior of the
else.
free world and the First Amendment. Yes, it was a very good. It was very good for humanity and for all of us. So we should all be celebrating, and I agree with you.
Oh, okay. On that note, let me move on quickly. You guys agree? Speaking of Elon Musk, he will be in attendance at President-elect Trump's inauguration on Monday, along with billionaires Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. That's according to an official involved in the planning of the event, who said that they would have a prominent spot at the ceremony, all three of them. By the way, Musk, Bezos, and Zuckerberg are currently the three richest people in the world, according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. In that order: Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg. Monday is a market holiday, but CNBC will bring you special coverage of the inauguration live from Washington. That coverage starts at 9 a.m. Eastern time. We're going to be talking to a lot of special guests, including Stanley Druckenmiller, who's going to talk to us about what he's concerned about just in terms of government spending, how we try and get control on that. But a lot of big guests who will be coming to us from that coverage. And again, it all starts at 9 a.m. on Monday morning.
Microsoft planning to pause hiring in part of its U.S. consulting business. This is part of a cost-cutting plan. It's according to an internal memo that's also instructing employees not to expense travel for any internal meetings, but to use remote sessions instead. Executives are going to have to authorize trips to customers' sites to ensure that spending is being used on the right customers.
Really? That's such a weird thing to think about when you think about how much they're spending overall on AI right now and getting other things out. I guess you got to look at all the spending that's taking place.
You got to look at everything.
You do. Meta Platforms, meanwhile, cutting about 5% of its workforce, focusing on the company's lowest performing staffers. On an internal forum, CEO Mark Zuckerberg informed employees that the company would be moving out low performers faster. He told workers that 2025 will be an intense year for the lower performers, not in a good way.
This is what Brian Chesky called founder mode. You remember the idea of stop listening to everybody else around you, do what your gut says, even when unpopular. And this is what Mark Zuckerberg is now doing, and you can see it across the entire enterprise.
Organization.
It all started with the hair. It used to be really short. Remember?
I like it longer.
I like it longer too, but he's like. He's not the same Mark Zuckerberg.
Well, I think it actually started with the mixed martial arts training. That was a few years ago.
And the surfing with the looking cool with the flag and stuff. Remember that?
Yeah, and 4th of July.
Okay, let's go.
Coming up.
I like him a lot more. And
I know you do.
Let's go. Move it or lose it.
Cheese will be next.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, the road ahead for Republicans, the party's lofty plans for a giant reconciliation bill. We'll talk to former Speaker Paul Ryan.
It will take a while. It's a sequence of bills. You first have to build your baseline, pass your budget, then do reconciliation. Fastest they could probably do this is probably July.
Plus, he left Congress during the first Trump administration. What does Ryan think about MAGA now, as Donald Trump prepares for a second time on the Capitol steps?
Well, of course you want Trump to succeed. You're a Republican.
Hey, look, I'm a conservative Republican. My brand of conservatism doesn't always overlap with Trump populism.
We'll be right back. This is Squawk Pod.
We're watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Andrew Sorkin, along with Joe Kernen and Becky Quick.
President-elect Trump is ready to take office in 5 days, and a big agenda item for him this year will be reauthorizing those Tax Cuts and Job Act and getting the economy back on track. Joining us right now to talk about this and more is former House Speaker Paul Ryan. He is the chair of Teneo and a partner at Solomir Capital. And Paul, thank you very much for being here.
Good to be back.
Today.
Happy New Year.
I want to talk about a lot of things and what your expectations are, but I know you've got your focus on the tax cuts bill and whether that will be reauthorized coming up this year. That was something you had fought for. I think you've called it your white whale.
It is. It was one of my biggest goals in Congress was to do tax reform. It's coming up for reauthorization. We couldn't make everything permanent. We made the corporate side permanent. This is the individual side, but it affects a lot of businesses. And when you have these kinds of tight margins like you do in the House and you're doing reconciliation, it is going to be a tough needle thread. That's why, to me, Republicans need to stay unified. Look, I want to see Trump succeed. I wish him well. If he succeeds, we all succeed as a country. And there's all of this optimism that's coming through the country. We just at Teneo, we surveyed 700 global CEOs and investors representing $10 trillion in market cap. It's a 32-point swing in optimism. But
from when? A year ago?
From a year ago. So that kind of optimism will manifest itself if Congress delivers on these policies. That means this reconciliation bill has to pass. It is going to be very hard to write. So to me, it's all about not having Republican factionalism erupt. Because if you break into factions, you can't get your agenda passed, especially with these narrow margins. So to me, it's really, really important that Republicans stay unified, get this done. And I think they're going to do it. It will take a while. It's a sequence of bills. You first have to build your baseline, pass your budget, then do reconciliation. But fastest they could probably do this is probably July. But
there's been this idea for one big beautiful plan that Mike Johnson and I think the Ways and Means Committee were kind of favoring one big plan to put all of this together instead of using reconciliation twice, which you have the opportunity to do this year. Kim Strassel from the Wall Street Journal says not doing it twice, not using that gift is like flushing this gift down the toilet.
I did it twice in 2017. I spent my whole career in Congress working in the reconciliation law. It's actually
Should it be one or should it be two?
I'm for whatever Mike Johnson and John Thune think it needs to be to get the agenda passed.
I think they think it's different. I think they have different
viewpoints
of this.
John Thune has a really nice cushion relative to the House. He's got a 53-seat Senate. Mike Johnson, he won't be at full strength until these special elections are done in the spring. So you can't even pass anything very tough until then. So frankly, I would defer to Johnson and to Jason Smith at Ways and Means. Those are the committees I come from. I chaired Budget, Ways and Means, and then was Speaker. I would defer to those guys as to what they think is necessary to pass it. And I think they're probably right. One big, beautiful bill with immigration reform, but border control and tax cuts is probably the way to go.
You know I love you, and I like to needle you and stuff.
But.
You know I love you.
Comma.
So now you're calling for unity.
I am calling for unity.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Would have been nice before the election.
He won. Look, he won.
And the other thing I thought was funny that you said was when you said, hey, look, I want Trump to succeed. You know who that sounds like? It sounds like a Democrat. It sounds like a Democrat saying,
well,
you know what?
Democrats sound like that.
Well, of course you want Trump to succeed. You're a Republican.
Hey, look, I'm a conservative Republican. I'm a free market, limited government.
No, but you know what I'm saying. That's who I hear.
Yeah, but my brand of conservative doesn't always overlap with Trump populism.
I understand, but it was binary. But you know we argued about that.
I know we argued.
Binary all along. It was always binary. And a vote not for Trump was a vote for Kamala Harris. Can you imagine?
I know you want to get back at this. Huh? Here's the point. A lot of this agenda, my kind of conservatism, Trump populism, it overlaps.
Okay.
We disagree on trade and things like that. I'm not with trade fights on China, but I'm not a big fan of all the tariffs on our allies. But the point is, all this other stuff, the tax policy, the border policy, the deregulatory policy, very good for America, very good for the economy.
Don't sacrifice the good for the perfect.
It only gets done if Republicans stay unified. And I think it's important that Republicans stay unified.
Okay.
Do you think they will stay unified?
I do, but it's going to be a challenge. I've watched Congress erupt into factions more often than not. And when Mike Johnson's dealing with such a razor-thin majority, you have no margin. So that's why Joe is giving me, he's riding me here because I think it's really important.
I wasn't riding. I just think it's funny when you come on and say, hey, look, I want Trump to succeed. That sounds like what Democrats say.
The man won. Look, he probably won the biggest political comeback in history. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the Grover-Cleveland race, but this is probably tops that one.
And you can say, we have people saying 1%. But all 7 swing states.
But
he doesn't need any help, Andrew. Go ahead, Paul.
No. You know what I think. You know what I thought before.
I know.
But now that we have an opportunity to pass what I think is a very good agenda, it's extremely important that
we stay unified. And he doesn't have to be reelected at this point. So he seems a little bit different. He must be more palatable to you this time around.
Yeah, and my hope is that by the end of his administration, he makes a good dent on entitlement reform.
That's what I was just actually talking about. What are the chances that not having to run for reelection, what are the chances that DOJ actually finally looks at entitlements?
Well, Congress needs to look at entitlements. DOJ can do a lot there. I think
or Congress.
What I'm
but it has
excited
to be led by the leader of the party.
Yeah. In an ideal world, in a reconciliation bill, you make the tax code permanent. And the way you make it permanent is you put big savings in that bill that in the out years pays for the second decade. That's how we measure it. and you have really good entitlement reform. That's the ideal reconciliation package.
Do you think that the tax policy, or the extension of this, is as is, or do you think there's going to be a complete rethink of it? A lot of folks are now looking, for example, the Wharton School has done a new budget proposal.
Yeah, I'm familiar with their model.
You know about it. Effectively brings actually the top top individual rate actually down to 27%, interestingly, but also then
broader base.
What'd you say?
With the broader base.
And then gets rid of basically all deductions, and then also moves the capital gains rate up to 27%. It's very interesting. I don't know if you think that Republicans and Democrats get behind that, or the only reason I'm asking is the sort of format with which we're living with today. Is that what will be voted on, or do you think that people are going to bring all these other ideas to the table?
Look, I spent my entire adult life in tax reform. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, right?
Right, Mike Tyson.
Getting this stuff through Congress is really, really hard. Look, I tried to get rid of SALT. I did a $10,000 SALT deduction. That now, because of New York and California members, has to be raised. When you're passing something through the House, you're relying on blue state votes. In the Senate, they don't have blue state people. So it's a totally different dynamic. Quick answer to your question is I think they're going to stick with the plan as it is. I don't think they have the vote margin to go comprehensive, different tax reform. Stick with the plan as it is, make some modifications, get it passed. To his point, the DOGE guys, first of all, those guys could do a lot to help digitize government, to bring sort of modern technology, because they're technologists, to making government and its payment rails and all of those things work much better. So I think there's a case for optimism there. But to my point is, if the way reconciliation works, if you want to make this tax code permanent, and certainty is a big deal for the economy, then you combine it with real savings that accrue in the out years and get yourself some nice debt reduction on top of it.
Can I ask you
That's the ideal.
A very
world.
practical tax-related question as it relates to the tech of it all. When I say tech, you're talking about the rails and everything else. There's been an argument for a very long time that taxes, meaning individual taxes, should just be able to be sent in a very easy way. We've talked about putting it onto a card. We've talked about having a easy-to-use website where everybody can just do it and all of that. And there's always been pushback, both from the tax accountants who want the business
and the systems,
but also, frankly, Republicans for a very long time who said we don't want to make it so easy. I mean, that has been a big pushback. Do you think that changes under this?
I think it changes. I think this is something these DOGE guys could do a lot of good on digitizing government. I always wanted the EITC to be baked into a person's paycheck so they could see work paying.
And not have to wait to get
and not wait for a lump sum at the end of the year.
Right.
I couldn't, when I was Ways and Means, I just wanted to make that happen. The Treasury Department still doesn't have the ability to even do that. They don't have the technical
tax credit for anybody who's playing
ability to do that.
Right.
So their rails are so screwed up. Their technology is so bad. So I think that's where I'm hoping DOGE.
But do you think people would be okay with the idea of making it a lot easier to pay your taxes?
I do. I think we're going into the 21st century. We've got to modernize all of these systems. The way we pay for our infrastructure, the way we file our taxes, the way we transmit money through the system. I'm working on a program at the American Enterprise Institute to digitize the entire social safety net. So we have digital safety nets, so that we have programmable benefits, so that you have real work requirements. You have, food goes for food. You can digitize all of these things. Right. I think there's a lot of conservatives are for that.
Why do you think that Donald Trump would necessarily look at the reform of the entitlement programs and do it, even though he doesn't have to run for re-election? He's a populist because he's popular.
And, that's where our versions of republicanism don't always overlap.
Yeah, everybody
but we have to. It's going to happen.
It's no what Joe said. Interest rates.
Hey, Paul,
we have to.
Revisiting the unity thing in a serious, I was serious lesson, but in a different way. Are you surprised at Mike Johnson, how he survived with such a narrow margin? It's really amazing. And then my second thing is, do you think Republicans could ever be like Democrats? Do you remember how many times Remember how many times Hakeem got?
Yeah.
He never lost. They're like I call them the board collective. They're like
that's it right there though. So you have to remember the mind.
They can never do that.
The mind of a Republican is as an individualist.
Right.
A lot of the battles in Washington are individualism versus collectivism philosophically.
They can't do it.
Democrats traditionally are more collectivist, therefore they're more happy to operate in that kind of a collective mode. Republicans are historically more.
So it'll never happen
because I think Democrats see it differently. I think Democrats think that actually Republicans are more aligned with each other. It's a very interesting.
One's a board collective, and the
you
other's
just heard
a bunch of
Reagan conservatives
Right.
say, "I want to see Trump populism succeed," because 8 times out of 10 we agree on things,
right?
And we're going to stick with the 8
How
and
much
not
do you
focus
think,
on the
by
2.
the
Are
way-
you at 8 now? Before you leave, I'm going to give
I'm
you a
not a
hug.
big fan of tariffs
I'm going
on
to give
our
you. You
allies.
come
I'm not
home.
a
I
big
left the
fan of
lights
that.
on for you. You come home.
So, but to the Mike Johnson question,
8 out of 10.
The reason, okay, 7. I don't know. The reason
Round it up.
Mike Johnson won is because he's a very honest man.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that when he talks to them, he keeps his word. Even if he doesn't tell them what they want to hear, they know it's truthful.
Yeah.
That's why Mike Johnson is remained the Speaker of the House.
Yeah, I'm a
he
fan.
represents
What
a
does that say
certain
about
type of conservative.
McCarthy?
There are others in the party that aren't his type, but they know he's a straight shooter.
Yeah.
Paul, what's your sense of, you advise a lot of CEOs now at corporations across the country, and a lot of them are now putting their support quite publicly, even if they might have been privately supportive. I think many of them actually weren't, and now they have switched somewhat potentially like you. What do you think of that?
I think they see a top-tier economic team coming in to the government. Bessent's a top first-round pick in any sense. Lutnick, perfect, really good guy for Ken Keyes. He's literally the most qualified person in the country to be the Assistant Secretary of Treasury for tax. You see Russ Vogt, one of the young budget guys we had in the House.
Yep.
He's one of the smartest budget guys in the country. You see, Kevin Hassett, very accomplished economist with a bunch of experience. I'm not a big protectionist, but Jameson Greer, who's going to be the STR, the guy's a very credible guy. Really knows what he's doing. So I think these CEOs see, an A team being put in place on the economy, and they're ready to go. That's what our survey tells us at Teneo. At Solomir, we invest in founder businesses. These founders in these middle market businesses, they're ready to go. They think M&A is going to be unlocked this year.
When you say
because they see this regulation, suffocation being lifted off the economy. And they see tax policy being more predictable and more favorable.
And Teneo, you see CEOs actually putting deals in place. This is not just talking about it.
Not
This
just
is
talking about it.
bids being made.
That's why I say Republicans got to deliver.
Yeah.
This optimism has to be translated into the policy that people are optimistic about taking place. And when you have these narrow margins, we can't factionalize. We got to stay together to get this stuff done. And that's why I think Mike Johnson is the perfect type of person to help deliver this. And that's why on the big, beautiful bill, whatever Mike thinks is the best way to go, that's what we should do.
And it's different. I asked, is it a little bit different with Trump? And Trump called a couple of those guys and said, they were going to hold out on Johnson. Yeah. And he called him that day and said, you do not want to get on the wrong side of this, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
We have about 18 months, maybe even less.
You're saying we?
We.
That's amazing.
As a country, we have.
I know.
Congress
I know.
has about a year and a half to get stuff done.
The royal we.
Yeah, we have about a year and a half to get stuff done.
No.
And then in the
You're
midterms,
back,
who knows
baby.
what's going to happen?
You're back. I like it. I'm happy. 8 out of 10.
All right.
Former Speaker Paul Ryan. Paul, thank you very much for being here.
Happy New Year.
Next on Squawk Pod, wise guys and the White House? Crisis communications expert Eric Desenhall has a new book on mob ties to the Oval Office, and it comes pretty recent.
One of the cliches we always hear in Washington, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. It turns out the cover-up works really well.
You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC. Here's Becky Quick.
Up and Becky, Q.
Our next guest is a crisis PR veteran. We're going to get his response to the California wildfires, plus share his unique insights on the White House's unusual alliances throughout U.S. history. Joining us right now is Eric Desenhall. He is the chairman of Desenhall Resources. He stepped away from his day-to-day duties at his company. He's got a new book that's out this week. It's called Wise Guys and the White House: Gangsters, Presidents, and the Deals They Made. And we'll tease it for now, just to say that you go back through lots of administrations, and this is not just a history book. You're looking at current administrations, too, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But why don't we start with what's happening with the California wildfires? Already, we are seeing the blame game taking place. What happened? What went wrong? How was this allowed to get so bad? Was the state and the city, were they prepared for what's happened here?
I remember years ago there was an LA earthquake, and I was watching the news coverage, and a reporter went up to a town manager and said, "What went wrong here?" And I thought, well, the earth moved. And so what's happening now is the only thing that matters in this news cycle is blame. That is the only thing people are going to want to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about solutions. It's all about blame. the mayor really cannot recover from something like this.
She was out of the country.
She's out of the country in Ghana.
She slashed the fire department's budget
by
millions of dollars.
And I think that when you are a mayor, when you're somebody in this situation, the whole idea in politics is it's all about accepting credit for things you didn't accomplish and taking the blame for things you didn't cause. She is going to take all the blame. There's nothing that can be done about it. The one that's more interesting to me, because it's more survivable, is Gavin Newsom, because he wants to have a future. And what is going to be imperative for him is what the public, if he wants to run for office, is going to need to look at is how well he takes your beating. One of the things that voters are very interested in, they want to see how well you take it. And whether you can endure taking it. And second, what he's going to have to worry about is bringing money to the state. That's really the focus. In terms of what the mayor can do, that is beyond anything I can possibly comprehend.
What are Gavin Newsom's odds of success at bringing money to the state? Already you've had the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, suggest that there should be conditions to any aid that comes along. And clearly this incoming administration is not friendly with Gavin Newsom and vice versa.
No, I don't think that the odds are great, but that at least he has odds. The mayor has no odds. There is no play there for her. For him, if he can get something to the state, it could work. The problem he's going to have is he's going to have tension between wanting to rebuild and environmentalists, who are his big constituency, who don't want to rebuild. And so it is an absolutely fraught situation, and you have somebody who wants to be president who external circumstances are really going to determine it more than anything he does.
You think he's going to be looking at the rebuilding process and saying maybe we don't do it as much because the environmentalists helped put him in the position he's in?
I think that that's a tension he's going to have to deal with. The problem is, how do you tell people who have lost their homes, well, we may not rebuild? I don't see how there's a win there. I mean, there's no option for them other than to rebuild. You can't just say, well, just move somewhere else. That's a little bit glib, and that's going to be a problem he can't dig out of.
More than a little glib, I think.
Yeah.
And then there are the questions that come back to why the reservoir there was empty, why the fire hydrants were empty. He's called for an investigation. How much patience will there be with that playing out, just given the acrimony that's already built up?
Well, that's right. And no matter how much a client under attack wants to get out of the blame situation, I have seen no matter what chess move they make, it always comes back to who takes the fall. And that is going to be the news cycle we are going to be in for a very, very long time.
How do you think of the contrast between what Gavin Newsom is doing right now and between what the governor of Florida, DeSantis, had done when hurricanes have devastated his state? Because you can look at this and say, okay, there are natural disasters, acts of God, things we can't control, but there are human responses to these things. And the response has been pretty different.
I think that there's been greater competence in Florida. I think that they're more used to it. And I also think that you have a leader there who, while controversial, is very, very camera ready in the sense that he looks like somebody who is in absolute command. I never really understood why George Bush got in so much trouble over Katrina, because there was really only so much you can do in a natural situation like that. But unfortunately, what the story becomes is the handling. It is always about the handling.
They didn't handle it. It was a vacuum. It was a vacuum, and they didn't address it. And if you let the chips fall where they're going to fall. It's exactly what happened to poor W back then. And probably should have never come out and said that Brownie's doing a heck of a job.
There's no question.
They mishandled the whole thing, but you're right.
But I think it's still a hurricane.
Exactly.
And you're still dealing with an act of God. There's a reason why force majeure clauses exist, because you're dealing with somebody beyond control. That's why I still find it humorous when I think of the reporter asking the town official in L.A. in 1994, what went wrong here? The tectonic plates moved.
Right. Let's talk about your new book, Wise Guys and the White House. When I first got wind of it, I thought it was going to be looking back at a lot of historic administrations that we've kind of known around the edges, whether that's FDR, whether that's JFK, some associations with the mobsters and things that they had done along the way. I think what's most interesting about this is you take this right up to the Biden and Trump administrations, that this is something that's still active today. What's the relationship between organized crime and power?
Well, one of the cliches we always hear in Washington, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. It turns out the cover-up works really well. And one of the things, they're cover-ups, and one of the things I've seen in the history from Roosevelt down to Biden is covering up organized crime connections actually has worked very well. My favorite Biden example is when he was running for Senate in 1972. He was behind. He was a kid. He was 29 years old. He had a serious opponent that was supposedly going to beat him, an incumbent. And the Teamsters, which were controlled by the Bruno family in Philadelphia, made sure that the attack ads that were going to hit Biden on election eve, the newspapers weren't picked up and delivered. The Teamsters made sure of it. So that's my favorite Biden anecdote. What's interesting about Trump is Trump drives people crazy when he says, when he's accused of something naughty, he says, that just makes me smart. He's actually right. Because if you look at how he dealt with organized crime, he did it in a way that was right on the line. Nobody can provably show that it was illegal. And to be specific about it, if you picture in Manhattan...
You're talking about in buildings.
In buildings. And you picture a building being built, you picture steel. Trump didn't use steel in Trump Tower. He used concrete. Steel is an international industry. Concrete is controlled locally. It was controlled by the Genovese, Gambino, and Colombo families. He simply gave them a good concrete contract. That took care of labor problems. And a detractor would say, yes, but if he got something in return that's illegal. My response is, it's been 45 years. Nobody has ever proven everything. And so when Donald Trump says that makes me smart, as much as people cringe, it's actually kind of true. The other thing that's fascinating about Trump, of all the presidents I go through, he is the only one who uses organized crime as a branding thing. He openly has said on television repeatedly, yeah, I had to deal with these people. He said on Letterman, they're very nice people. But as only Trump can do, if he's asked 5 minutes later, did you deal with a mob? He would go, no, I would never do that. And people are going, okay. I mean, this is Trump. So the branding, to use organized crime as a branding, as a patina, as a whiff of who you are, is unique in presidents. But I go back to Roosevelt and the work with Lucky Luciano and in the Johnson administration.
And the waterfront, protecting the waterfront.
Protecting the waterfront, and Lyndon Johnson when they had civil rights problems.
Were you unable to connect the dots with Joe Kennedy and...
Yes, Joe Kennedy was not a bootlegger. And that is a very important thing to understand.
What about the elections about West Virginia, Chicago?
Well, yes. But Jack, Bobby, and Joe were different characters. Joe worked the mob to get labor support in 1960. Jack and Bobby didn't necessarily know. What was more interesting is the efforts to kill Castro, where Bobby Kennedy and Jack Kennedy inherited the Nixon campaigns, the Eisenhower administration's efforts to kill Castro. And Bobby Kennedy was furious to hear that the mob had been contacted. And the CIA finally said, Bobby, you want him dead, Castro, but you want us to use the nicest people? Right. Really? Is this where we are?
Right.
So you'll see in the book what ended up happening, but they did use the mob to try to get Castro. Didn't work.
It's fascinating stuff. Eric, thank you. Eric Desenhall.
Thank you.
The book, again, is called Wise Guys and the White House, and we appreciate it.
That's the pod for today. Thanks for tuning in. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern to get the smartest takes and analysis from our TV show right into your ears. Please follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. That's it. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.